Hi guys. Thank you for DRIJKONINGEN give us such a good opportunity to have this conference together, everybody together, and I'm really honored to get the chance to moderate this panel. Yeah, so we got four guests here, and they're super experienced in the user acquisition. I guess user acquisition is super important for us developers to get more valuable users. So I guess, how about let our panelists to start introduce themselves. Simon?
Okay, great. So hey everyone, hope you're enjoying lunch. My name is Simon NEWSTEAD. I'm based in Hong Kong, targeting a global audience, particularly in the US, so I'm an east to west example. My company is called Friendzu. We focus 100% on 3D games for women. You may think it's a niche, but it's a pretty big niche with 300 million people around the world. So we started in the App Store actually pretty late. We entered in for the first time about 1 year ago. We have 3 games in the marketplace. Our first game has got about 5-6 million downloads. Yeah, I can share my experience about how we acquired the users and the trends and so forth.
Leo?
Hi everyone. This is Leo from PopCap China. So I run the PopCap China team and bring all the PopCap's great game from the West market to the China market.
Cool. Anton?
Hi everyone, my name is Anton. I'm from Jakarta, Indonesia. I run a company called Touch 10. We started in the early days of the app stores when I was still a student in Japan in 2009, and when I was still, as a student, still very thin and much more handsome than now. And then, yeah, I hope that we can learn from each other about how to acquire users.
Kenrick?
Yeah, my name is Kenrick. I run the user acquisition for a startup here in Singapore called Nonstop Games. What we do is we make games for gamers, tailor-made for touch. So we're working on mid-core title, a big mid-core title at the moment. It's going to release in about 2 months. Yeah, look forward to share about our user acquisition experience.
Cool, cool. As you can see right now, we have 4 panelists from different genre or different types of games, from really female-facing, really casual, mid-core. So we can see it'll be very interesting to see what's your insight in terms of the user acquisition. I mean, user acquisition has been hotter and hotter topic these days, and what's been changed, and what do you see the trend for user acquisition through the last 12 months? Starting with Simon.
Sure. So it's a great question. I think a lot has changed in the market 12 months ago compared to now. I think that the games have gotten a lot better at monetizing the users. So that's seen the CPI rates go up significantly in the last 12 months. If you get games like Kingdom Age and Crime City and Puzzle and Dragon, pulling in so much money per user, that lifts the whole CPI model significantly. So that's definitely been one change. And the other related to that is that the kind of the old tricks of bursting up the charts and getting lots of installs and getting velocity of installs and getting the top free charts, that doesn't really have as much impact as it used to, due to algorithm changes and UI changes in the app stores themselves. So I think that shift from kind of like a simple bursting strategy to more of a more complex kind of ROI sustained strategy has been an interesting trend. And then also I think another interesting one is cross-promotion. There's a lot of developments in cross-promotion. It used to be just simple banner ads, and now it's getting a lot more advanced, weaving it more into the gameplay itself. So we can chat about that more.
Cool, thanks. Leo, do you have any insights about how to acquire users? I know PopCap don't need to really acquire users, but what's your strategy in terms of like acquiring users in China?
Okay, so according to PopCap's strategy and our philosophies, the quality is the best way to acquire users. Of course, we can buy users, but make high quality games, make the investment in the area that can help the game be better, which is the area we think will generate more users. So instead of buying user directly, we always intended to spend money in building better products, high quality games. So we always saying that like PVZ is a great game. Actually, for the first 2 years, all the marketing dollar we spend in the market is only 45,000 US dollars. That's total. So even we look at this number from a small studio perspective, it is still a very small number. So that means we don't spend much money on user acquisition, but we do spend money on the talent acquisition and build better products. If you think that's kind of user acquisition, we spend a lot of money. If we're talking about the market in China, the market is very different. In China, the traditional MMORPG is still the dominate the whole market. So more than 85% of market share are dominated by the MMORPG, which has very high ARPU. That means these companies can spend a lot of money to buy users. But as the time progresses, we see smartphone is catching up. So the traditional MMORPG game company and the web game company move their strategy from the traditional business area into the new business area, which is the game on the smartphone. So they also spend a lot of money in this area as well. In the last 12 months, the user acquisition cost per user significantly increased. It's similar to the global market on Facebook, on Google, on Apple. It's similar or even higher, because the freemium mode in China works so well. So that's why the ARPU of each user significantly changed on the mobile devices in the last 12 months. So this company can spend more money to buy users. So that's
Cool.
the situation happened in the last 12 months.
Cool, thank you. As we know, PopCap can spend a lot of money on the marketing, or just to really make the games really cool, so that people will go for the games on the IP on its own, on the content basically. So the content sells for itself. But as you mentioned, that for like really hardcore developers to make it real hardcore games, given the ARPU is so high, so they were willing to spend more money to spend on the user acquisition. So as a startup, like Anto, you're Touch10. How would, as a startup, how would you spend money wisely so do the user acquisition without bankrupt your company?
Yeah, so yeah, as both of them have mentioned, in the past 12 months, the user acquisition costs just skyrocket, right? And it's bad news for small studios like us who don't have enough money to acquire, like who have a budget of like millions of dollars to acquire users. So what we actually try to do is similar to what similar to what PopCap is trying to do, which is, I think, quality is the best. No matter how much money you spend, if the game doesn't interest the player for the first even few seconds nowadays, because the users are bombarded with new games every day, and they are getting funner and funner, more fun. Sorry for the English. Every day. So if you don't have good quality, it's just a waste of money.
Totally agree. But Kenrick, I know recently, congrats again to Nonstop, got the 3.5 mil funded. I know you're still a small team right now as a startup, but what's your monetization? What's your user acquisition strategy? I mean, comparing to the rest of the team, because as my understanding, Nonstop is basically a company based in Singapore, but targeting Western world. So, that's my definition about it as an Asian developer in Asian countries. But how do you do the UA for the Western world?
Yeah, I think there are two things that, like, if you do UA, you always have to start with. One is like, what type of game do I have, and you have to really tailor make your acquisition plan according to that. And the second one is your measurement. You can basically spend unlimited if you know your LTV of your users, and this is so important, and there are so many studios who are not doing that. If I know that my LTV of my user is $3, I'll spend on any network unlimited amount if they acquire me any user under $3, basically. So that's our philosophy, or that's how we start. Anything I can spend under my LTV, I'll buy. It doesn't matter. But you have to be able to tie that back to the source where it came from, and that's where the analytics part comes in, and that's a bit more difficult, I'd say. But in terms of like the different networks and like UA channels that you can use, I kind of look at it as a bit as a stock portfolio. So you can go from your like low risk, high value type of channels to your high risk, way more volatile channels. So you go from, say, like video ads, which is high value users that you acquire, Facebook very high value users, to your incentivized installs. And it really depends on what type of game you have, how you want to acquire your users. And so for us, we're doing a mid-core game with like a real-time map. So we're not helped by users who leave our game, because we'll have like cities on a real-time map, and like if the cities are empty, it's not good for our game. So we need to focus on the high-value users. So that's how I'm tailoring like our strategy. Like we want to be in this segment. Other games, more casual games, are probably better off looking at the more incentivized. You know, you want to rank up the charts, get a lot of virality going. You have to start with your game and start with your analytics. If you figure those two out, you can spend unlimited amounts basically.
Cool. But to follow up a question, you mentioned that as for the core game, you need to target for most valuable users. But how normally? What's the strategy to get the most? I think not only like for Simon, everybody wants for most valuable users. But how do you define this is the most valuable users, and how do you find the most valuable users? Kenrick.
So one thing is targeting. Obviously, targeting is very difficult on mobile. I'm very bullish on Facebook actually, like their mobile app installs. It's amazing. It's the only channel on mobile where you can very specifically target users that you want to have. Another way is to filter them out before they even make the install, and that's why video ads are very good. Like people have to actually see your game, watch a video of it, and then if they're interested, then they'll make the install. So it's not because they're incentivized, it's not because they click a banner. No, once they install, they are actually interested. So they will be like engaged users.
Cool. So Simon, I mean, as a core game, you need to acquire like that. Like Kenrick can make a really good strategy about doing UA for the core game. But for casual game like yours, how do you normally acquire valuable users?
Yeah, I think I agree with what was mentioned. If you've got a very niche core game, take like the Funzio titles. They're pretty niche. Targeted towards adult male specific type of interest in those games. You can be really kind of pinpoint targeting. Use Facebook and see who've installed similar games, and then just target those ones, and you'll be paying multiple dollars for the installs for those. I think that makes a lot of sense for those kind of games. The more casual you get, the more you can go into kind of mass market channels. The cost per user is lower, and you're relying on the gameplay being kind of mass market, appealing to many people, more easy to spread virally than some of these kind of more core games. So our first game, which was a fashion game, so dress-up games are huge, as a genre. So we did a 3D, kind of the first 3D version of a dress-up game. And that's a pretty mass market type of offering for adults as well as for teens and young girls. And that one, we put a lot of emphasis on word of mouth, because we can get the users in. We may not monetize it at Clash of Clans rates, but we monetize well enough, but we still need to go and get viral and organics to make it very profitable. So we did a lot of work on physical word of mouth. So even within the game UI itself, like how would someone on the train in the MRT look over the shoulder and actually see what that game was? They may say, oh, it's interesting, and then they can see the logo and then actually, type the keywords and do that. And we did Facebook sharing integration and those things. So I think that the strategy, like if you're a very core game, you don't have to worry as much about, word of mouth, because you can just pinpoint acquire. So for example, we have more of a mid-core RPG for women coming out soon. And that one, the acquisition strategy will be different from our mass market fashion game. So I think I totally agree. It depends on what sort of game that you have.
I see. As a casual game, as we can see, like from Angry Bird, from like Plants vs. Zombie, like from PopCap's franchises, you can see it make a lot of offline merchandise, so that it's sort of a way to make things more viral, leading towards like getting more marketing kind of effects, so that people get more exposed to your content. But a question for PopCap though is that PopCap is the company making games for both West and the East. And for the West, it's simpler, as Kenrick and Simon mentioned that, and Anton also mentioned this. You need to find right distribution strategy, right, UA strategy. But for China, as we all know, that is a different channels dominating majority in this is kind of a fragmented market. So how would PopCap help to do the UA in China, such a fragmented market?
So yesterday I did a speech like we mentioned in US. My counterpart only worked with just a few stores, app stores on Apple and Google Play, Amazon. That's pretty much. But in China, we are today working with almost 20 different Android stores, and that's not all. So some of the industry companies work with 280 different stores in China. So all makes sense. It's a long tail. So if you really want to do business, you need a huge team behind to work with these 280 stores. We can say in the future it will consolidate, but that's the future. As a company, we need to survive until that consolidation really happens. So we are not talking about the future. We need to make sure today we are alive and tomorrow we will be survive. So in this way, we started working with many channels, but pretty soon we figure out a strategy to do the cut down. The determination was made by the ROI, so the investment for the development, all the marketing, sales, development in one channel, and to see what is the real return from this channel. So after launch the game in quite a few channels, we just cut down a few. Because as an international company, our cost is higher than the local competitors. So that's why we cannot work with 280, but while the local competitors can work with 280. But that means also our market coverage in the channels in China is lower than the local company. That's the fact. But also, we bring high quality game than the local competitors. So we do believe the game itself is the best way to reach to the users. The quality of the game itself is the best way to reach to the users instead of buying users. We think user acquisition is kind of funnel. So at the top, we acquire as much as user possible, but it depends on cost. But the bottom is the user we can monetize or the money they spend. So we need to make sure this funnel work well. So sometimes, especially for the hardcore game, so not reach to the mass media is a strategy that's well recognized by many companies, because not everyone will spend the money in the hardcore game. But as a casual game as a casual game company, PopCap, almost every user is our user. So from 6 to 60, female or male, they could be our potential users. But in the same time, they could be the player, but does not mean they will be the payer. So we need to find out who is the right person who will play the game and will pay for the content. So in the past, the world is different. People who play the game, they need to pay the money first. But after freemium was introduced to the world changed. People who play the game might not be the person who pay the game. So in MMORPG world, people who spend money, actually they feed people who spend time, actually they feed the person in the game who spend money. So that's the equation. So in this way, we need to find out what is the mechanism between the people who spend money and the people who spend the time. So this is also a funnel. If we look at a funnel from the time people spend in the money inside a game, is one thing. If we look at the money people spend inside a game, is another thing. So for the economy system in the game, we need to find a balance between those two things. But on the mobile, it's less important because most of the mobile game are not that highly competitive. as the MMORPG. But as the time progresses, as the user acquisition cost goes higher, I think more and more hardcore game will dominate the market. So that means we need to start from today to think of the economy system inside the game. The people who spend the time and the people who spend money. We need to set up a balance for those two types of users. So that's the thing I think we need to start from today. So it's not only from the interface to acquire users, but also it's a procedure from when we acquire user and when the people really spend money. So it's a very long process.
Yep. Thanks, Leo. That's really insightful. Thanks. But for Anto, as your startup, as we first mentioned, for Asian markets, you have, for China, for instance, you have different fragmented channels even though you need to know how to monetize eventually, but in China you need to get through all the channels. But for the Western market, there's not a lot of channels for people to as people can leverage as in China. For a startup like yours, how would you leverage different user acquisition channels in terms like as we know, we have different apps for people to promote, like free to play or free apps a day, this sort of thing. What do you think about this kind of channels for people to promote their games?
Well, for us, we find so that there's two things, two categories that we find is that one is the sustainable method to actually acquire users, and one is the unsustainable one. And the one you mentioned, which is free app a day, or like suddenly your app become free, hey, download now, kind of Groupon side of deals, apps or sites, are the one that we find unsustainable because of the amount of users over time. I mean, number one is you don't know what kind of end user you are getting, and most probably because these are so-called discount hunters or freebies kind of hunter, you're not gonna get a lot of people who actually want to pay, right? And second is I think Apple has been cracking down, and I don't want to say names, but a lot of these sites or apps. So I don't think that's kind of sustainable way, but it does works. We tried some of them. It does works, and I think the one that I want to share maybe is the sustainable one for me is how we do it in a lot of our launches is that we value human relations the old school way. So that's why events like this are great, because we meet a lot of people, we meet a lot of media. So what we do is actually we contact these bloggers or sites who review games, the big ones such as Touch Arcade, App Advice, Pocket Gamers, and all. The Asian one is Tech in Asia, E27, and all these sites. Indonesia is Duniaku, they're there. So I value this human relation, and it's my policy of not hiring a PR agency to do it for you, because I think the personal email always is the best way of you to get them to publish a story, and if they like you, they will always ask for more scoop of your game. So I think that's the more sustainable way.
Cool, thanks, Anto. As we know, normally we say there you can just either use acquisition directly from different ad networks, or like Simon just said, you can do a lot of cross-promote between your own games, because if you have multiple titles. So what do you think about the idea that if we can say there's a community there that say now, Carrick, you're launching your title, right? You're launching a title like very soon, and you talk to Simon, and Simon say, maybe we can do a direct deal. I mean, that's what's happening right now in China in terms of because there's limited channels on iOS, and people can do a lot of people either do a lot of user acquisition through ad networks, but the cost is getting higher. So we're going to see a trend. Do you guys see the trend that in terms of developers can do a lot of offline or online direct deals with each other? Simon?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, okay, who here is an indie, like less than 10 people, 1 or 2 games? Okay, so a bunch of you guys. I mean, it's really hard to compete against the big guys, because the big guys have multiple titles, so they can subsidize the cost of user acquisition, and across many, many different games. And if you look at the graphs, the public graphs, like DNA's like cost of user acquisition, it's gone down over time because they have a big portfolio they can kind of cross-promote between. So if you're a small guy, you've basically got two options, which is one is, three options. Be very lucky and get a mega hit. Option two is to build more games and make sure that they're really close in theme and genre so that they can cross-promote very strongly. Or the third option is to go and tie up with other gaming companies who do have games of similar genre and user base and work with one of the networks. So for example, we do work with Chartboost. And we work with other kind of direct acquisition channels, about 10 or 12 channels. But it's good if you don't have the portfolio of other games to cross-promote to work with other developers. And you have to figure out how to make sure they're giving you good users and not just giving you the worst users. So that's a whole nother topic. But yeah, it's worthwhile because you can do exchanges, you don't pay money for it. So I think for the smaller guys, that's particularly useful to do. But I'd love to hear the other opinions.
Correct.
Yeah, the cross promotion. It sounds very good. It sounds almost like you get something for free, but there is still a cost attached to it. Like cross promotion is inventory that you're giving away for something that you could potentially monetize. So it's not something free. You're actually paying for it in terms of not receiving any money. And the other good point that you mentioned is like as developers get more and more sophisticated, they will segment out their high value users and only show like your ad or your cross promotion, your banner, whatever, to those users that are not monetizing for them. So you have to be very, very careful, I think, in who you make the deals with. Make sure that they show it across the board and they don't have like that segmentation in place. Otherwise, you just, you might get some installs, but you're not getting any users that are actually monetizing.
Thank you very much. All right. I guess I'm running out of questions, but I wonder if anybody here has any questions to ask.
Does anybody have a question for the panel? You all know exactly the best way to get installs for your apps. You are all experts and should all be up here on this panel yourselves.
My perspective into that is to make a game, the two biggest costs. One is at the developments. So you need to spend a lot of money on development, your games, like all the team costs, overheads. Another biggest cost is on the marketing, which is user acquisition. Either like UA through advertising network or doing a lot of PR and marketing. So guys, we got 4 excellent panelists here.
Oh. Headed your way, hold
on. Thanks for all the information and stuff. I just want to know for like a startup or for an indie developer, small company, when you have very limited resources, how much should you decide to spend on user acquisition? How, why, things like that. Thanks.
Maybe I can start first. Yeah, that's a really good question, and we're in the same boat as well. We're pre-VC, so we don't have big institutional investors on board to give us money for spending millions. So I think you start with like what is the biggest what can you do that costs very little that will have the biggest chance to kind of get people spreading your app. So your look and feel, your branding, having very unique characters and unique art style is really helpful, especially in the early days. And if you're small, you want to, of course, minimize your costs. So, like in every ad channel, there's always the low-hanging fruit. The traffic that doesn't cost as much, but there's not much volume of it. So if you're small, it takes a bit of time, but it's good to kind of go to multiple channels, like maybe 10, 20, 30 different channels, and get 300 users here and 250 users here and 1,000 users here at much lower costs. Because if you buy more volume in that individual channel, you're going to be up in the normal ad rates. So I think you kind of have to be a little bit scrappy and kind of like piece together traffic at the start, and then do a lot of like community outreach go into the forums, go into where the opinion leaders are for some of these games. Because if they like it and they can spread it out, that would be good. I've got to say though that doesn't really work for example, the female space. There's not as many women who are browsing forums and trying to find the latest, reviews on games or thought leaders. So, but for games for guys, I think you can do that, especially like strategy, puzzle, RPG.
Anybody else?
I have a quick question. Can you hear me? An indie developer, one choice you have for acquiring customers is obviously going with the publisher. So how do you make that decision as an indie, whether you want to go it alone, and what do you give up when you go with a publisher? Where you sign your game up for DNA or Agree or one of the other large publishing platforms?
Maybe I can try out to answer that. Well, I guess the big question will be. I always tell myself, or I would tell my partner, if you can do it yourself, then never go with a publisher. So there's always a cost to give, right? There's always a pie to share. So if they can give you a bigger pie, if they can do things that you can't do yourself, for example, for sure you'll be in Touch Arcade because we are so and so, then I guess that's something worth considering. But if they can't give you any offers or they just put your games as one of their games and don't do anything, then maybe it's not a good choice. I guess maybe that helps.
Maybe to add on to that, so when we were kind of small and before we launched our game, we pitched a whole bunch of publishers because we were no one and we didn't really have any user base at all. And I think I probably spoke to like 10, 15 different publishers and I got 10 to 15 rejections. I didn't get a single publisher interested in the game. And so we by default went ahead and actually published the game ourselves, and it turned out to be a really good hit and millions of users and millions in revenue and etc. So I think that's one thing, is that it's pretty hard if you don't have a track record, if you're just starting up, to even get the publisher to listen, to even talk to you. So that's one consideration. If you're a startup and you don't have much money to spend on marketing, and a publisher is giving you a good deal and giving you some minimum guarantee and some good marketing plan behind it, I think it's a good way to get started. But you'd want to have a way that you can build your brand into that, so that if people like the game, they can have some affinity to you, the developer, as the brand. So for example, we've done one deal through a third-party publisher, and in that deal we actually got kind of the loading screen with our branding on it, so that hopefully it's a successful game in its own right, but it will help support our other self-published games in the future. So I think it's good if you can get a deal, but it's sometimes not very easy to get publisher deals if you're new.
Cool, thanks. I think we can give another question, one last question. Right.
Oh, keep missing you.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to what was mentioned before about trading installs. Does have a cost because you lose out on the ad revenue, particularly if that's one of your plays. It's something I've certainly noticed. And so on that basis, I was just sort of wondering if you had your thoughts on segmenting those users out so it doesn't cost more than the free installs you're trading essentially don't cost you more than the ad revenue you're actually losing. Does that make sense?
Come again, like what's the...
I think you mentioned it, was the fact that free installs, like doing a direct deal with another game company or something like that, does have a cost, because of course you've lost the chance of getting revenue from that user, like potentially from selling an install, by giving that user that install to another company. So you're going to get installs free, but there is still a cost associated with that in lost revenue.
Yeah. So you're saying, like, how do you select your partners to work with there?
I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on how to segment the users you're going to send to the other games, for example, so that you don't lose the revenue at that point.
Ah, okay, so yeah, that totally comes down to the analytics solution that you're using. I think there are a few pretty good ones out there that you can use, and you set your own parameters for however you want to segment. Like, you can only show it to people who've played the game for like 2 months and never made a purchase, or you only show it to people who play the game once a week, or whatever term you want to use. Like you can segment them out. In terms of choosing a company to exchange with, it sounds a bit harsh, but maybe go with the greater fool than yourself. That's probably the way.
I'd agree with that.
That's probably the way that you're going to come out on top. Because if you go with the more sophisticated guy, they're going to send you more crap than you're sending them, basically. So
Yeah, totally.
that's the way it is.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks everyone. Thanks for all our panelists.
Great work, guys.